Why do you burn alone in your own flames?
If you do not first become ashes, how will you rebuild? Embrace your fire. Embrace your grief. Go into your solitude. I love those who dare to create, who strive to transcend. For in doing so, their old selves are destroyed. Yes, so they might reach the shores of a new life. Oh, how I love those whose souls remain rich and vast, even when wounded, even when the smallest risk could spell doom. They leap without hesitation into the unknown. Should you stand alone, suffering in the endless dark, today, may you hold fast to every last ember of courage and...
Here, Brandt references Nietzsche's work Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which discusses the teachings of the founder of Zoroastrianism, Zarathustra. Rousseau's mention of burning in flames is one of the key components of Zoroastrianism's pursuit of wisdom and clarity, while Brandt's response quotes 3 lines from Nietzsche's work. "Ready must you be to burn yourself in your own flame, for how could you become new if you have not first become ashes?" As well as, "I love those who know not how to live except as downgoers, for they are the overgoers." Here, what Nietzsche and Brandt talk about is that the downgoers, those that stick with the dogma of traditionalism, are superseded by the overman, or the overgoers, who are willing to destroy their old selves in traditionalism in order to pursue clarity and wisdom. Brandt's final line also quotes Nietzsche, where he says, "I love him whose soul is deep, even in being wounded, and may perish from a small experience. Thus goes he, gladly, over the bridge," which Brandt rephrases to mean that those who are willing to take a leap of faith despite immense risks, yet still gladly goes over the bridge, are the truly enlightened ones, as the overmen.
Life is but a walking shadow. A poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by fools, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Here, the vision that Fhrolova experiences that is later repeated in the story comes from the infamous "Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow" soliloquy from Shakespeare's Macbeth, which takes place right after his wife has committed suicide and before he is also to be divinely punished for his transgressions. Spoken near the climactic end of Macbeth, this is not the first time Kuro has used Macbeth as a symbolic reference. In 2.0, Fhrolova and Hecate, who is a character herself from Macbeth, discusses the 3 prophecies given to the witches by Macbeth, and in 2.7, as the story comes to a close, Macbeth also laments the end of this tale.
Soon she will wear a new crown, one ordained by fate, never to be defied. Her fate was written long ago. What remains is but a fleeting moment of stolen peace.
As discussed in my Cartethyia video, her thorn crown is an allusion to the crown of thorns worn by Jesus as a mocking king of Jews. It is something that symbolizes not only selflessness and sacrifice, but also divine duty and fate. You can see a Bible verse that expresses this as follows.
Through me, walk the path of glorious ascension. Through me, enter the city of eternal bliss. All who enter must first forsake all hope.
The inscription that Rover reads in their vision on the stone tablet comes from the inscription that is on the gates of hell from Dante's Inferno, where he and the Roman poet Virgil must cross through in order to go through hell, purgatory, and finally, heaven. Much of Galbrena's story is based on the first of Dante's trilogy, being Inferno, so if you are curious on that, I recommend watching my video on Galbrena's logic and symbolism. This is another reference to Inscription, the Gates of Hell in Dante's Inferno, which promises that they will live an eternal afterlife if they forsake hope. Nirvana's line here is inspired by Dylan Thomas's poem, "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night," which Kuro loves and has referenced multiple times. Dylan Thomas originally wrote this poem for his dying father, which mirrors Nirvana's dead grandmother. When she says, "Don't go gently through those gates," she refers to Dylan Thomas's poem in fighting and resisting even on the cusp of death. In this scene, we see the shattering of Cartethia's crown, which is a motif that has occurred a few times already in the story. Her weapon, for example, the Defier's Thorn, is made from the shards of her once broken crown, which symbolically represents the defying of her fate. The shattering of her crown of suffering here essentially shows that her service to Leviathan and the divinity is now over.
I couldn't see his face clearly, but I heard him call himself Caligula. Caligula was a tyrant feared throughout Septimon's history. Notorious for his cruelty that defied reason, the world remembers him as the Mad King. From Septimon to Ragusa, the blame lies with me. Perhaps this is the fate I could never outrun. Caligula's fate. It's calling to me.
When Ovidius references Caligula, he is talking about a real Roman emperor that was one of the first after Rome turned from a republic into an empire. Known as one of the most infamous emperors, he was said to be despotic, mad, and extravagant. He did some really crazy shit, like declaring himself as a living god, ordering random executions even on senatorial families, and I think at one point he even made his horse a senate member or something. He is definitely the inspiration behind the Mad King that Ovidius essentially sees visions of.
By the sacred statues of the divinity, evil shall know no peace. Only the righteous may taste eternity. Wickedness shall be purged by the blade, and those who consort with calamity shall fall.
This line is most likely taken from Proverbs 24:16-18, where it's been translated to mean that those who are willing to enter Leviathan's paradise will be forgiven if their hearts are true, but those who detract from unity and seek supposed calamity will not be spared within Leviathan's embrace.
You have slaughtered my flock and ushered in ruin. The sentinel's wrath is already upon you. I will cast you back into damnation myself before your carnage spreads any further.
So this is the first time in the video where I'll be talking about the symbolism of the lamb. I'm definitely going to be talking about it more, especially in relation to Galbrena. But this is essentially another biblical reference where God's followers are referred to as a metaphorical flock of sheep, with Jesus being the Lamb of God. You can see this in verses such as Zechariah 11:4, that Fenrico means to say that he is a sort of shepherd of Leviathan, protecting the flock of its faithful followers from the carnage of those who resist its will.
You should be howling in the Styx depths, your soul aflame in the pit's cruelest fire, forever.
So I'll only mention this section in passing because this is going to come up a lot later where I'll be talking about it more, but the Styx here that Fenrico mentions is a reference to River Styx of classical underworld myths, being a river of damned souls where people who struggle to pass on to death wade its waters or shores forever.
halts your advance. You have already tainted your feet in the river of blood. There is no retreat. The path born of injustice must be fortified with further transgressions. The soul must be steeled in bitterness.
Bloodshed cannot be avoided. Blood must pay for blood. The path born of injustice must be fortified with further transgressions.
This line by Fenrico is actually a mirror to the prophecy that Phrolova provided through Hecate in the 2.0 update, which in itself is inspired by Shakespeare's Macbeth. It's not a direct quote, but if you've read the play, it's a super obvious reference. Essentially, in Macbeth, the main character, being Macbeth, begins his reign of bloodshed by killing King Duncan, which starts an unstoppable chain of murder and violence as he realizes that he needs to keep killing in order to secure his position of power. This is what the quote means, essentially mirrors Fenrico, as he must keep committing violent acts after being corrupted by the Frenodian, such as sending heretics on the pilgrim sail. Eventually, in 2.5, he pays the supposed blood for blood, as he dies at the end in the same way that violence and the road of further transgressions leads to death for Macbeth. If you want this explained in more detail, I have an entire video solely focusing on the links of Macbeth as well as Phrolova and Hecate within Wuthering Waves, so feel free to check that out.
Death is the fruit of transgression. To resist it is to defy the will of the divinity.
This line is most likely inspired or comes from Romans 6:23, where it notes that sins will result in one's downfall and death, but to embrace Leviathan's divine will mean eternal life.
Lifting imposed restrictions.
So I think a lot of people know this, but in case you don't, the mirage you see in a civilization capsule is the same unknown goddess that appears in the very first cutscene of the game.
To build our republic, unity became the bedrock of civilization. But Leviathan seized upon mankind's longing for unity to manifest civilization's shadow. Forged hollow grace, feeding on stagnant, obedient minds.
By you, we are unified. By you, we are born.
From the founding of civilization, it had invaded their spirit and beliefs. In truth, we were no different. We both sought to mold civilization after our own will. Leviathan was born from the dark side of mankind's longing for unity. Their fear of the sea shaped its likeness as a great sea creature. If the Renascitans wouldst walk a path free of divinity, they must face their past and the most primeval fear. They must overcome the shadow born of civilization.
So, to preface this, if you want to learn about how Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan links to Leviathan and Wuthering Waves, please consider watching my video specifically on it, because that can explain it way better than I could ever do right now. But essentially, if you're not bothered to do that, which is fine, Thomas Hobbes is someone who wrote a political treatise on how society needs to be united and controlled in order to not descend into the barbarism and terror of their natural selves, a state which he called the summum malum. In order to explain his beliefs, Thomas Hobbes used a biblical monster of Leviathan, or Leviathan, to explain how a ruler needs to do whatever necessary, no matter how immoral or despotic, to guarantee the security of the state. This is something that preys on the weakness of humanity and stands in opposition to Imperator's beliefs of freedom for humanity to dictate its own future.
O light of Genesis, shield us! As we were at the dawn, so we stand today, as the Sentinel soldiers.
This line refers to the light of Genesis, which comes from the first lines of the Old Testament of the Bible, the book of Genesis. Coming from the dawn, or the beginning of time, the first lines of the book of Genesis tell of how God created the world, which refers to essentially the dawn in which the fearless acolyte stands to fight against Leviathan.
A lie told often enough becomes the truth. Weave memory, history, experience, and you can craft a man who exists in the minds of others.
Here you have a line that's very famous if you've ever studied modern history, especially propaganda studies. It essentially talks about something that we in a discipline call the illusory effect, where something that has been repeated enough times gradually gains more and more credence. It's a quote that's often attributed to either Lenin or Goebbels, but we don't really know exactly who for sure.
Oh, a being born of lies, grasping for meaning in a world that offers none. Such a pursuit demands the courage to question the meaning of one's existence, yes. It demands pain.
So, this isn't exactly a direct reference, but I can't help but to think that what's being said here is linked very closely to the philosophy of Albert Camus, who was one of the people that argued for a concept called absurdism, which is the idea that life inherently has no meaning. I draw this link specifically because Cristoforo seems to be a sort of very twisted idea of Camus's ideology, where he believes that everything is designed to be prescripted and humanity's goal is to fight back from the shackles of fate, which in a way is kind of the opposite or more radical version of Camus's idea of absurdism. When Cristoforo says that finding out one's point in life demands pain, it reminds me a lot of Albert Camus's essay on the myth of Sisyphus, which is actually where, if you were wondering, you get the famous quote, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." The reason why Camus actually says this is that he himself, who is a sort of evolution of Nietzsche's belief of the Overman, which we discussed previously, advocated that though the world offers no inherent meaning, just like what Cristoforo says, one must find that meaning for themselves. He famously discusses suicide within the essay, much like what happens to Mia and Ovidius, as a concept born of the incompatibility with life's purpose, rather than what we consider in modern times as a sort of social phenomena. Because, yes, it demands pain to find out about your existence. Because, as Camus says in my favorite line from him, the true meaning of life is whatever you are doing that prevents you from killing yourself. And as such, one must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Did you not see? I did. His intentions, his ambitions, his darkness, his weakness. To lay a soul bare is not always an act of cruelty. Humanity is fate's plaything. I simply showed them the strings. I lit the fire, the hunger that might ignite their free will.
If you didn't know what Cristoforo was talking about here, he actually is discussing a common topic in philosophy called determinism, which argues that, like what Cristoforo is saying, all human actions are stringed along by fate or some other external higher force rather than independent free will. It's basically those kind of like the illusion of free will memes, but expanded as an entire philosophical dilemma. when you think about it, you can actually kind of very quickly see the world from a determinist perspective. For example, you may think that you chose to watch this video right now out of your free will, but is that really just that, or is it more so a combination of factors such as YouTube's algorithm recommending it to you, your boss giving you some free time off, or a myriad of other reasons? How many of your decisions are independently actually based on your own thought and decisions? It's a very good question, and as the bitch Cristoforo keeps saying, that in itself is the question.
Will you suffer in silence beneath fate's poisoned arrows, or rise to defy this world's endless trials? I too await your final answer.
So I'm really sick of Cristoforo at this point, as you can probably tell, because every time this guy talks, I feel like I have to say something. But anyhow, this line is probably a reference that not a lot of you guys know, but I was taught this when I was a kid, when I was in school. And the symbolic link within this kind of section as well is rather East Asian, because it's referencing the Buddhist parable of the poisoned arrow, which is a story of a man who was shot by a poisoned arrow, and instead of immediately treating the poison, he sat there and refused to do anything until he figured out who shot the arrow, the name of the person who shot the arrow, and where they lived, and a myriad of other ridiculous questions. Eventually, however, that man dies of poison and knows none of the answers that he was seeking. And this is a sort of moral that in any situation, what you must do is that you need to target the central and immediate problem rather than thinking about other important side issues. And essentially what Cristoforo is saying in this line is that instead of sitting on your ass and kind of suffering through the unimportant consequences of fate, you need to target the root of the problem, being fate itself, which in this case is the problem of the very world itself, rather than looking at all these sort of like side quests in Cristoforo's eyes.
But since you're so eager, I'll leave you with one final clue. I've never had much fondness for overwrought dramatic irony.
This is pretty common knowledge if you studied Shakespeare and other kind of playwriting forms or stories, but if you didn't know, dramatic irony is a writing technique where essentially there is a gap in knowledge between what the audience understands and what the characters in the story know. For example, I don't know, in a romance drama, right? Both romantic leads probably don't know what the other person is thinking, but we as an audience have a more omniscient view, so we can understand what both of them are thinking, right? And that's probably something that leads to both enjoyment and cringe when we look at it internally. That specific gap in knowledge between the audience and what the characters know is what we call dramatic irony. And what Cristoforo is saying is that he understands much more about the story than what we as a sort of character within it do. But at the same time, he's not too fond of overwrought dramatic irony. He doesn't like keeping the characters of his script too much in the dark. This is another reference to Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Even though we've discussed this in another video and known about Leviathan, it's good to see that Cantarella actually has confirmed this for us, that Leviathan as a Fernodian is born out of humanity's fear and shadow, or in other words, as we said before, Hobbes' concept of the summum malum, which is the fear of the wild and brutish state of the nature of humanity, which forces them to be controlled by society.
The end times are drawing near. The Ragonesi cling to hopes of a blissful afterlife. Septimontians have long believed in another world that begins after death.
This section, which references the end of times, talks about the apocalypse within the book of Revelations in the Bible, which is where a future prophetic vision of when the armies of God and Jesus would come back to reclaim the world for their followers. Within it, the old kingdoms, in this case being Raguna and Septimont, are destined to fall so that God and his kingdom can rise.
What is that in the center? An opening. Something inside is sending them frequencies to recover.
The opening in the earth you enter to go into the journeying paradise is inspired by Dante's Inferno, where the entrance to the underworld and hell is depicted as a hole in the ground that Dante and Virgil enter in order to progress the story. At the entrance, Dante laments that he is not ready for the journey, saying that he is not Aeneas, the hero from Virgil's Aeneid, who braved the underworld, or Saint Paul, who reached the third circle of heaven. This, I think, could be a symbolic reference to the Septimonians and the Ragonesi, who help you defeat Leviathan and are in turn inspired by classical myths as well as also Renaissance Italy and that sort of like more Christian side of things.
And you, Rover, if your resolve is true, be ready. When the time comes, I'll guide you to paradise.
In addition to the previous one interpretation you can take of this is that Galbrena portrays herself as a guide to hell. She takes on the role of Virgil essentially, guiding Rover, or Dante. The line that just played definitely supports this, as she says that she will guide them to paradise, exactly what Virgil does for Dante's journey to Paradiso, as long as their resolve is true, which Virgil also says to Dante at the mouth of hell, which we talked about in the previous section, where Dante had doubts before he entered.
The hesitant shall not return, the timid shall not pass. Tell me, little lamb, whence do you come, and where does your path lead? Come, little lamb, open your eyes, sharpen your claws. It's time we journey into the underworld. Yet her power was corrupted. Back then, she was weak, as powerless as a little lamb to be slaughtered. Each step forward was a gamble with death.
The idea of lambs comes from the Bible, with lambs being depicted as innocent creatures that can be sacrificed to wash away sin. Because of this, Jesus, who died for humanity, is seen as the Lamb of God, and the one that will defeat all other beasts. This symbolism is utilized exclusively in the symbolism of Galbrena as a character and her song Aphelion. As she is both a sort of angel and devil, she as a child is kind of depicted as an innocent lamb, but when she is blighted and corrupted by the dark tide against her will, she is forced to grow claws to fight back against her fate and escape the underworld.
I shall keep watch over the outside, speaking with you through the mouth.
Referenced first in my Iuno video, the catabasis is a process where a living person visits the underworld and escapes this sort of visitation alive. This has been achieved by many classical figures such as Aeneas, Odysseus, Orpheus, Heracles, as well as Rover within Iuno's story and Augusta when she faces her fears in the dark tide. Dante's journey into the underworld and hell is essentially also a catabasis, as is Rover's journey into the journeying paradise, which is effectively also hell and death.
Congratulations, little lamb. You've survived the trials of the Borderlands.
This section is a reference to Borderlands of Hell, which Dante and Virgil visit before they actually enter hell proper, which is marked by the inscription to Hell and Inferno, which we've already talked about in this video.
How rare. A mortal.
fearest for thy survival. Yet thou wouldst risk it all.
So I can truly live.
To seek a life true while death surrounds thee. Absurd.
Within the beginning of Dante's Inferno, Dante is in the Selva Oscura, or the Dark Wood, where he meets three beasts that represent the three big vices of humanity. I expanded upon this in my Galbrena video, but this is most likely symbolic of the three beast nature of Chimera, who is both in Galbrena's Resonator trailer, which depicts the Selva Oscura, as well as also at her beginning in Oak Hollow, when she first descends into hell as a child.
This cassette tape is a rare find from Lahai Roi. It preserves your most innate frequency. Perfect for what's ahead.
The descent into the well when Galbrena first mentions Lahai Roi, a reference to Well of Lahai Roi, or the well of the living one who sees me, seems to me like a nice little reference, as the hole you jump down into seems like a little bit of a celestial or sort of divine well, similar to the one that Hagar, the maidservant of Sarah and Abraham, saw when she ran away from her household for the first time. However, we do know that Lahai Roi will be in the next city or province that we will be going to, so a lot of the references and symbolism is still up for debate when it comes to this.
Shining with your love, we stand united in devotion.
Though this is a bit skeptical, within the song that Leviathan's devotees sing within Ewan Galbrena's descent into the Journeying Paradise, they're most likely loosely inspired by biblical verses that also sing the praises of God and the eternal life that they promise. For instance, the Song of Solomon in the Bible, within some translations, substitute Jerusalem for the eternal city of radiance, which is what Leviathan is sort of advertising within their gospel. For instance, the eternal city that they talk about is professed through song and love, in a twisted sort of way compared to the devotion towards Leviathan.
With hearts full of joyous loyalty, we rise from the sea, guided by your light.
Another reference from the devotees, this is what I think is inspired by Isaiah 60, where in some translations they mention that the followers of God rise toward the light, their hearts shining with joy. In Isaiah 65, it is mentioned that the riches of the sea will be turned to you, which is an interesting inspiration because in Leviathan's case, it's based on the fact that their existence manifests from the sea. But in the Bible, it's based on the fact that the whole earth's wealth is to come to God's believers. There's a bit of a twisted link here.
The Styx Lake. A myth once whispered in Septimont, now carved into reality by Leviathan.
This lake. It's not quite like how I remembered it.
The Styx Lake. A place where all souls meet. Some call it by another name. Main's Deep.
So I think a lot of people got this reference, but the river within the Journeying Paradise is based on the classical myths of the underworld rivers, which also appear within Dante's Inferno, within Iono's Chaos, and Augusta's vision of the Dark Tide. It also, very importantly, appears within Dante's Inferno, which this whole update takes immense inspiration from. The River Styx, the river of souls of people who cannot properly give up their lives and pass on to death, appear as the Borderlands of Hell, or the Land of Death. Though in some sections it's actually rather the Acheron Styx, it's still basically the same idea. Within Iono's story, we analyze how her whole story and escape from chaos was based on the story framework of the classical myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, which is something we got to kind of confirm within Update 2.7. Within the myth, Orpheus has to retrieve the soul of his dead wife from the underworld on the condition that he can't look back at her the entire time as he treks out of hell. However, he loses heart at the very exit of hell, being the River Styx or the Acheron, and as such loses her forever. Hence, we get an achievement, Don't Look Back, which is earned when we reach the River Styx.
A vessel for the dead bears not the weight of the living. If you would cross, cast off the riches and honors of your former days.
Within classical myths of the first river of the underworld, the Acheron if you're Greek, or the Styx if you're looking at more Roman sources, there is a consistent famous component of the myth being the ferryman of the dead, Charon. In order to cross into the underworld or hell, if we consider it to be part of Dante's Inferno as well, the ferryman Charon must take a fee of the silver obol, or the silver coin, as a fare in order to row the dead across the river. This is why in a lot of classical funerary traditions, a silver coin needs to be placed on some part of the body, most commonly underneath the tongue.
This is where Chimera was born.
Do you mean me or us? Born from the fury that courses through the earth, rage cast my spine, and slaughter forged my chest. I've torn through countless souls, rained fire on fields, slept to the wails of 1,000 dying cries. They remember me as Nemean, the name of the land I reduced to ruins, a name forever seared into their hearts with terror.
Within Chimera's monologue about his creation, he mentions that the lion component of his being is based on the Nemean, which is a reference to the Nemean Lion in the myth of Heracles. The first of Heracles' 12 labors is to slay the Nemean Lion, a ferocious beast with fur that could not be penetrated by any blade. However, the Nemean Lion is eventually slain when Heracles uses his strength to choke it out, which is kind of ironic because Chimera is only stuck left with its head.
No wonder the beholder couldn't read your frequency. It can't pierce something as ancient as the concept of death. I've seen many who can use their forte to mimic or create, but to perfectly replicate another's frequency and even forge an entirely new body. There is only one person who can do that. The thousand-faced survivor. The grand architect of the Fraxidus, Schwarzlock. But I doubt that's your real name, huh?
So really cool clue for the future of the story got revealed in 2.7, as we finally got the name of the grand architect of the Fraxidus, which is Schwarzloch, which is German for hole of black. It doesn't necessarily mean a black hole in terms of science and space, but more so an unknown void or an empty entity. Galbrena mentions that Schwarzloch is beyond death, which is interesting because we only have some cursory clues as to what this could possibly mean within the story in the future.
Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets their hour upon the stage. And then, in the blink of a moment, is heard no more.
So we've already talked about this at the very beginning of the story, but what Cristoforo says here is a repeat of the line from Macbeth's "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow" soliloquy.
I'll kick the gates of hell open myself.
Slow down. I must savor the exquisite taste of their agony. It's Hanu.
Someone call the Undertaker.
I don't actually play Devil May Cry, but I think this is inspired by the Devil Trigger mechanic within the game. I'm not too sure, so you guys will have to correct me if I'm wrong. As well as that, I do think that some of the attacks in Beholder mode seems to be kind of inspired by McCree's ultimate in Overwatch, but I don't really know for sure.
Everyone has a mindscape. Some say when countless seas of consciousness flow together, they make the essence of Solaris. I've seen many places, but nothing quite like this. It must mean a lot to you.
Within my Shorekeeper video, I discussed in detail the preliminary links of how Wuthering Waves as an IP is heavily based on the works of the Polish author Stanislaw Lem, being the sci-fi novel Solaris. I recommend you watching my Shorekeeper video if you want to know more, because it's kind of hard to explain everything here. But within this scene, we got to see that Rover's vision is based on the login screen of the game, which is an island surrounded by ocean. This is based on the fact that Solaris, within Lem's novel, is a story of an alien planet where the entire ocean is a living, conscious entity, and the final scene in the book shows a vision of the main character's island within the sea that symbolizes him dying and merging from the consciousness of Solaris. This idea is pretty incredibly proven because Galbrena actually directly references this, saying that the mindscape is a group consciousness of the countless seas of Solaris, which is very clearly inspired by the world of Lem, considering that it has literally been referenced to in the Dreaming Deep of the game before. One more thing I just realized as well is that Abby's design may also be a reference to Liam's work. Her eyes in Tacit Mark, which are round with red and blue, and as well as that have kind of like these mini pupil tacit marks within them, may be representative of Solaris' ocean and lament, because not only do tacit marks kind of represent the laments and Solaris' ocean extension, but in Solaris, the novel, the colors of the two suns that orbit the planet Solaris are red and blue. So, I don't know for sure, but just some food for thought.
So, you could say this place hangs between life and death. Your friends are here too, each of them fighting their own demons. But
this line is very interesting, because after the descent into hell, Dante and Virgil within Inferno descend into purgatory, which is a place of limbo between life and death. In essence, Rover's mindscape is essentially this period of purgatory, which makes sense because it's the climax before the final act of facing a journey in paradise, which matches Dante's trilogy of the Divine Comedy, being first Inferno, or Hell, Purgatorio, or Purgatory, and finally Paradiso, or Heaven.
when I hunt, I often travel through the night. The darkness is thick, but faint stars hang above to guide me.
So within this cutscene, some people in the community have theorized that the stars in the sky are actually the convene system that we have within the game, like the pulling system. And if this is true, then it actually makes sense, because I'm pretty sure I can count, there are 11 shooting stars in the scene, and there are also 11 resonators that have been pullable throughout the Renacita arc. That may be a coincidence, it might not be. It's not really a theory I'm confident in, but it seems kind of quite a coincidence, so have it as you will.
Leviathan has underestimated human resolve. To me, these gravestones, they're signposts left by the living for those still fighting. Like stars destined to burn out. They refuse to stop shining until the very end. There's always someone in the dark, giving their life to light the way and pass hope to those who follow.
So this section, this whole mention of stars and not giving up, is actually another reference to Dylan Thomas's poem, Do Not Go Gentle in That Good Night, which Kuro has used an uncountable number of times on this point, to the point that I'm kind of a little bit sick of it, just a little bit. This scene specifically not only mirrors the idea of the poem of not giving up before the very end, but even actually takes inspiration from one of the stanzas of the poem, which reads as such. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
Mortals must seek salvation. Mortals must follow a uniform creed.
Betrayer. Fleur-de-lis.
Your time has long passed.
Such ignorance. Mortals must follow a uniform creed, lest they descend into chaos. Mortals must seek the focus of face, lest they crumble beneath calamity. Follow my path! 'Tis the sole way through civilization's eternal night! Under my guidance, Raguna will know no tears. The people shall rejoice eternal. Sacrifice and pain will be no more. Isn't a world like this wonderful?
So we talked about this a lot already, but this section is based on the principles of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, with these tenets actually first showing up within Cartethyia story and being basically what Hobbes' ideology is all about.
I am the beginning and the end, the first breath and the final sigh. I have ever been Renasita's sole divinity.
Across some translations of the Bible, this line from Leviathan can be seen as being inspired by Psalm 121, where God, the maker of heaven and earth, and having lasted since both now and forevermore, declares that he is constantly watching. In some versions, this has also been kind of transferred into meaning the eternal creator, or, in other words, a clear link to Leviathan, that has lasted from the first breath to the last, which links very well to this scene actually. So this scene is also linked to Hobbes' Leviathan, but with the inverse idea of the Summa Malum that Hobbes sort of like created. Because Hobbes' Summa Malum is actually based on Cicero, a Roman statesman's idea of the Summum Bonum, or the hope of the inherent good of humanity, which essentially expresses that people are part of society because they hope they can work better together. The Summum Bonum is based on the opposite of Hobbes' ideology, and as such is a driving force behind our protagonists and their friends' kind of efforts to defeat Leviathan. This section has been a really hot topic in the community ever since the reveal, but I will have to disappoint you all and say that there really isn't enough information to make a strong enough an evidence guess at what it could really mean. Essentially, Abraxas, the ultimate god in Gnosticism, that exists on a level even higher than the Lord or God of Abrahamic religions, is representative of a sort of totality. It's a sort of being that ascends past human conceptions of morality or dualities. It's something that combines and resolves opposites into a complete whole. It is wholeness and completion. And this is really interesting because if we are to speculate and link the symbolism together, it would infer that perhaps Abi exists on a level higher than that of the Fernodian Leviathan, because Leviathan itself posits itself as a sort of Abrahamic god, as we've gone through a lot of religious and biblical references today already. But it could also mean that Abi is a sort of being that straddles both worlds, being perhaps both good and evil, perhaps both Sentinel and Fernodian. Additionally, since Abraxas symbolically is often associated with ultimate totality and individuation, it does most likely draw at least some reference as well to Carl Jung, who talked a lot about it within his work. It represents a ultimate uniting of opposites and deviating elements of one's own psyche, such as we said before, any form of duality. However, again, similar to the whole reference to Swazlosh, there's just not a lot we know right now as to what it could possibly mean, except for the fact that Abi is probably pretty high ranking in terms of the evil, or even maybe good, forces of the world of Wuthering Waves.
Civilization's infancy must come to an end. So long as humanity remains cradled in the Sentinel's arms, it will never walk, let alone evolve. That is why I wrote this final act. And those who cannot transcend their limits and overcome their lesser natures will remain imprisoned by their own making. Well, such souls deserve no salvation.
So as we come to the end of the video, we also come full circle of references. This line by Cristoforo, again, makes a close link to Nietzsche, which was the very first link that we talked about, in terms of Brand's play and Thus Spoke Zarathustra at the beginning of the updates. In this section, Cristoforo makes a rather cruel take of the Nietzschean concept of the overman, which he introduces in the work. While Brandt glorifies those who dare to create and cast away their past selves, Cristoforo goes for a sort of violent, sort of social Darwinist take of this, that those who don't want to shed their limits and traditional dogma deserve to be left behind and die. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching. I just decided that I would make a mega thread sort of video of all the references within 2.7, because as you can probably tell, it's been a lot. One of the best updates so far from the game, and I am rather excited because next update we will be looking at Choyun, or Choyun, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and we go back to Eastern symbolism, which I haven't done in a while, so I'm kind of excited for that. But anyhow, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time.